Hello, my name is Schneider. I'm a student affairs practitioner in the Bay Area. I use the pronouns they, them, and their. And on the campus where I work, I focus pretty specifically on violence prevention education and bystander intervention. So I'm going to start with a story. Last night I went out to dinner with my partner, and we were at a sushi restaurant. And there was something on the menu that I wanted to sort of combine to kind of create my own custom dinner. So when I asked the server about this, the response that I got was, "No, we don't do that here." The server, who I perceived to be a woman of color, was pretty clear in that. But in my sort of entitlement, right, I assumed that the person didn't understand what I was asking, and so I explained myself again. Now, the reason I'm telling you the story is that one of the ways in which critical pedagogy is important to me as a practitioner is in reflecting upon and working to counteract my internalized dominance. In that moment, I was completely acting out of dominance, and my partner, who's a woman of color, definitely picked up on that, and her sheer silence as the server walked away was a pretty clear-cut indication to me that things were she was not happy. So it took me a little while to really be able to own the ways that I had acted, and we had a pretty good conversation about it after the fact. But I share that story as an example of the ways in which I aspire to, and clearly am not always successful in, role modeling the owning of my internalized dominance in my work with students and colleagues. As a white person and someone who clearly benefits from white privilege and has been impacted by internalized white supremacy, it feels like a constant effort to reflect upon the ways in which I'm acting out of my dominance. In particular, when I transitioned from living and working in the Midwest to being in the Bay Area and found myself consistently in environments where I was surrounded by a lot of racial and ethnic diversity, this became more and more important for me. Some of the ways that I like to engage in this type of reflection with students is by working with white students to help them through the same process of becoming critically conscious of their whiteness as I experienced. Unfortunately, I didn't have that process until graduate school, but I have very vivid memories of sort of those awakenings and really can empathize and relate back into those early stages. And because I think that in order to work towards dismantling the systemic oppression that is inherent in many of our systems in higher education, we must all be doing our own individual work. That's one of the reasons that I see a big sphere of influence in terms of working with students, particularly white students, on internalized dominance. Now, a point of intersectionality for me is looking at my transness and the way that that intersects with my whiteness. In particular, I identify as a non-binary trans person and often call myself genderqueer. But I'm also transmasculine in terms of presenting in a way that most would read as masculine and therefore benefiting from male privilege in some regards. This is a new experience for me and one that I'm learning how to navigate as I move along. But it has definitely taught me a lot about what it means to be benefiting from the combination of whiteness and masculinity. Now, particularly as it relates to inter-trans community dynamics. I have the sheer privilege of being a part of a community called T-Circle that's all trans and non-binary identified folks in higher education. And we've had a lot of conversation about the ways in which internalized dominance shows up in our spaces. Going back to this theme of reflection, one of the pieces that I have found really helpful for me as I navigate my own internalized dominance is having authentic dialogue, sometimes really difficult and uncomfortable dialogue, with other white folks who are in that space to talk about the ways in which our whiteness is showing up. And how can we work to make sure that we're not actually perpetuating some of the very systems of oppression that we're working to undo, right, from this collective and organizational approach in terms of our trans identities. One of the tools that I like to employ when it comes to thinking about transness and whiteness at the same time is Dean Spade's critical trans politics lens. This also really relates to some of the activism work that I do on campus as it relates to issues of equity and inclusion for LGBTQIA folks. On my own campus, we have a university-wide committee that's looking at making our campus more equitable and safe for folks of all gender identities and sexualities, and also uses a really intersectional lens. Recently, I was asked to co-chair this committee, and while I was really excited for that opportunity, I actually turned it down. Because I felt like there was already an overabundance of white voices and also white transmasculine voices doing this kind of work on campus. Dean Spade would talk about this as centering the most marginalized voices within marginalized communities. And I recognize that as a white transmasculine person, I am not the most marginalized by a far shot in terms of trans and gender nonconforming folks. So some of the ways that I like to really try to bring a critical lens are through reflection and through authentic dialogue. Clearly, there's still a lot of growth edges for me as it relates to being able to reflect and understand and name more quickly in the moments when my internalized dominance is impacting the way that I'm showing up in a space. So that's something that I look forward to continuing to grow and engage with as I continue my journey as a student affairs professional. And secondly, authentic dialogue. And I think for me, someone who is socialized as a white person, have often been discouraged from engaging in their really most challenging dialogue as it relates to race, particularly internalized dominance and internalized white supremacy. So that's another growth edge for me, and I'm certainly always looking for and excited about opportunities to engage with other white folks around these topics in particular, internalized dominance and internalized white supremacy, as I know that these conversations in the past have been a great source of healing and continued growth and learning for me. Thank you for taking a few moments to listen to me talk about some of the ways that I work toward being a critical educator and enacting critical pedagogy in the work that I do. Bye-bye.